Warhammer 40,000 is a science fantasy universe established in the grimdark future of the 42nd millennium. It's not science fiction like Star Trek or Halo, and it's way more violent than Star Wars. There are 6 major races that are locked into a never-ending war taking place in our very own Milky Way galaxy. These races include the humans, which are organized under a dystopian society called the Imperium of Man. The Eldari, sometimes referred to as the Eldar, which are an elf-like alien species that once ruled the galaxy, but now have been reduced to a dying race. There's the Orcs, which are a savage and war-hungry alien species that only cares about conflict. The Necrons, which are an ancient, soulless robotic xenos that once ruled over the Milky Way galaxy 60 million years ago. The Tyranids, which are an animalistic, hive-mind-controlled superorganism that invaded the Milky Way galaxy. Then there's the Tau Empire, which is a technologically inclined alien species that is the youngest of the major races in the galaxy. And finally, you have the Chaos Gods and their demons. This is a faction of other dimensional entities that feed off the emotions of real space and wish only to break the veil between reality and their chaotic dimensional plane called the Imperium. Although these are the 6 major races in the 40K universe, they can be broken down even further into sub-factions, and on top of that, there are hundreds of other minor races that participate in countless battles across the stars. The 6 major races represent the playable factions on the tabletop, and today we'll be going over each race's origin, followed by their individual factions, their appearance, and finally, why you want to play them on the tabletop. Let's begin with arguably the most popular race, the good old humans. Known as the Imperium of Man, humanity in 40K has the most playable factions and is the focal point of the narrative of the game. The origins of humanity is for the most part unknown. To the citizens of the Imperium, their existence isn't something that should be contemplated. They simply should see it as a blessing by their holy savior, the Emperor of Mankind, that they are even alive. To the players and the few humans within the lore that have the power of knowledge, humanity was either created through the normal means of human evolution, or they were created by an ancient race known as the Old Ones. The Old Ones are a minor race in 40K that are going to come up a lot in this video, because they account for the creation of the majority of the races in the galaxy. We have a detailed video explaining the origins, the history, and the whereabouts of the Old Ones. At the end of this video, if you're interested in finding out more about the Old Ones, I suggest you check it out. I'll link it in the description below. But for right now, I'm going to give you a brief explanation of who they were. They were basically the first intelligent species capable of colonizing the stars. What made them so special was that they were the first to utilize psychic powers. You can compare psychic powers to magic in a standard fantasy setting. These are otherworldly powers that allow the wielder to do some incredible things. What sets psychic powers apart from the rest of science fantasy is the origin of the etheric force. It's an alternative dimension called the Imperium. Using their psychic powers, the Old Ones were able to create a path from real space into the Imperium and then back out into real space, thus achieving faster-than-light travel and colonizing the galaxy. They created an almost utopian society, and for reasons we're going to talk about later, the Old Ones eventually took it upon themselves to genetically engineer psychically powerful races all throughout the Milky Way galaxy. The common belief is that humanity is one of these races that they created. During the Neolithic era, in the early stages of humanity's existence, when they were still a very primitive people, a group of psychically powerful shamans began to fear for their lives as they felt the source of their power, the Imperium, changing into a chaotic place full of demons that wanted to consume their souls. Scared that they wouldn't be able to reincarnate, and thus no one would be left to guide humanity, the shamans decided to pool their collective psychic energies by reincarnating as a single soul in a single human body to create an individual called the New Man. 1,000 shamans sacrificed themselves to create the Emperor of Mankind. This immortal, perpetual psyker is the leader of humanity and the individual that sits on the golden throne. The Emperor quietly guided humanity from their prehistoric beginnings until they were able to colonize the stars. They were able to form an interstellar confederation and establish a basic level of control over the majority of space around their homeworld, Terra. But eventually, due to a cybernetic revolt by the Men of Iron, the rise of untamed psykers, and the birth of the Chaos God Slanesh, all topics that we have extensive videos on our channel, so check them out. We'll talk a little bit about them as we go along the history of all the other races, but just understand that those are really major events in human history, and there are videos that already exist on the channel, so check those out at the end of this video. But anyways, because of all these things, the Human Interstellar Confederation basically fragmented. This era in human history was known as the Age of Strife, and it was terrible for humanity. It lasted quite some time, until finally the Emperor decided to launch the Great Crusade and unify the ancient scattered remains of humanity into a great empire known as the Imperium of Man. Now that we have a quick origin story of humanity, we can take a closer look at each individual faction within the Imperium of Man. The most popular faction is of course the Space Marines. These are the superhuman warriors of humanity that the Emperor used to conquer the galaxy during the Great Crusade. They are genetically enhanced warriors, they are physically stronger, far more resilient, and mentally superior to most normal human beings. In the presence of a Space Marine, also referred to as an Astarte, most people feel a combination of awe and fear. They are basically demigods or angels of the God Emperor made flesh. The reason you would want to play a Space Marine army is because they are the most versatile on the tabletop, and since they're the most popular faction, they constantly get new rules, lore, and models. And then we have the standard military faction of humanity, the Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard. These are the standard soldiers of the Imperium. They resemble you and me if we were thrown in the 42nd millennium and were given a las gun. And just like you and me, the average Imperial Guardsman is just cannon fodder for the enemy. They're pretty weak. The reason you want to play the Astra Militarum is because they're the type of faction that favors heavy vehicles like tanks, and also massive amounts of infantry. Their lore, rules, and models are also updated more frequently because they're humans, and after all, humanity is the main narrative focus of the game. Next, you have the Adeptus Mechanicus, also known as the AdMech. The Adeptus Mechanicus was the human empire that ruled over the planet of Mars, but when the Emperor of Mankind unified humanity, he basically forced and threatened the Adeptus Mechanicus to become part of the Imperium of Man and supply the Great Crusade with technology in exchange for a small bit of autonomy. They use this freedom to worship technology to the point where they believe each machine has a soul. They call it the machine spirit, and the Emperor is the conduit to the machine god called the Omnissiah. This religious doctrine is known as the Cult Mechanicus, and it has shaped the faction to the point where most of its members are more machine than man. You would want to play these guys if you like the steampunk aesthetic, if you like a shooty army, or if you enjoy the concept of zealot androids. The Adeptus Mechanicus can also be further broken down into two factions, the Collegia Titanica, or the Titans, and the Imperial Knights. Both of these divisions answer to the Adeptus Mechanicus and worship the machines. They're part of the machine cult. The two factions are made up of hundreds of giant robot walkers that take on a humanoid form. Many of these designs are as ancient as the old human Interstellar Confederation, so they predate the Imperium of Man. They were predominantly created to help defend the colonies of humanity when they first ventured out into the galaxy. You would want to play this faction if you like the concept of elite robot walkers. You can buy 2 or 3 Imperial Knights and your army is set to go for the tabletop. The Titans, however, are a rarity in most games. Unless you're playing a large-scale game with a lot of points, you don't really see Titans. Next, you have the faction known as the Sisters of Battle, or the Adeptus Sororitas, or Sororitas. These are the elite warriors of the imperial religion known as the Imperial Cult. The cult was formed after the Emperor was entombed into the Golden Throne. We're going to get into why he is on the Golden Throne a little bit later. Just understand that for a period of time, up until now actually, the Imperium of Man was left without the Emperor's immediate guidance, and so humanity began to worship the Emperor as a deity. Although the Emperor always preached against this because he knew that worship or faith of any kind was actually feeding the Immaterium, but eventually the teachings of his godliness became an enforced belief in the Imperium of Man, and then the powers of the church and the administrative side that he established came together under one man, Goj Vandire. Vandire was basically a corrupt individual who gained control of the Imperium and formed the organization that would become the Sisters of Battle. After the leader of the Sisters of Battle, Alicia Dominica, directly spoke to the Emperor and learned of Vandire's corruption, she killed the heretical usurper, and with the help of a man named Sebastian Thor, the Imperium of Man was reorganized into what it is today. The Sisters of Battle became the defenders of the Imperial Church, now called the Ecclesiarchy. They are clad in power armor and wield the same devastating weaponry as a Space Marine. For all intent and purposes, the Sisters of Battle are basically female Space Marines. You want to play the Adeptus Sororitas if you prefer a military force with a religious theme, and obviously they're all women. Their model line is fairly new, and if you're the type of person that favors infantry, specifically elite infantry, as opposed to heavy tanks and weak mobs of men, then the Sisters of Battle are definitely for you. The last human faction we're going to talk about is the Adeptus Custodes, and like all other human factions, their origin is tied to the Emperor. They were created to serve and defend the Emperor of Mankind during the Great Crusade. They stood with him when he walked amongst man, and now that he's on the Golden Throne, the Adeptus Custodes still protect him and the Imperial Palace. They are stronger and more decorated than most Space Marines, but share a similar origin. They are genetically enhanced, but carry the gene seed of the Emperor, unlike Space Marines that carry the gene seed of the Primarchs. Each is a bastion in their own right, a sentinel of unmatched capability, and possesses a singular purpose: to counter any possible threat, whether it be human, alien, or demon, against the Emperor of Mankind. The reason you would want to play this faction is if you want to play something that's stronger than a Space Marine, but obviously it's going to be more elite. So you're going to have less models on the tabletop than a regular Space Marine army, and you're going to be limited by a smaller option of actual models. There are dozens of other human factions in the lore of Warhammer 40k, but either they don't have any representation in the tabletop, like the Imperial Navy and the Navigators, or they have too few models and the rules aren't really there to support a full army. I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with a core army and then move on to these specialist armies, such as the Inquisition and the Militarum Tempestus. Now we can finally move on to the non-human factions of Warhammer 40k. Let's start with the Necrons. 60 million years ago, when the Old Ones were the dominant race in the galaxy, there was a second, less powerful race that made their first steps into the stars. They were known as the Necron tier. These were the predecessors to the Necron race. They were much shorter-lived and lacked psychic powers like the Old Ones. In an attempt to unify their people and gain the secrets of immortality that the Old Ones possessed, the Necron tier decided to wage war against the Old Ones in a conflict known as the War in Heaven. This was the first major galactic war in the Milky Way galaxy. It's very complex, and we have a standalone video that goes in depth as to actually what happened in the War in Heaven. I suggest you check it out if you're interested at the end of this video, but a quick synopsis is that towards the middle of the War in Heaven, the Necron tier knew that they were going to be defeated by the Old Ones, so they turned to the godlike galactic parasites known as the Catan to help them defeat their rivals. The Catan did help the Necron tier. They turned them into the robotic Necron race. They consumed their souls and gave them necrodermis body, thus giving them immortality and the powers to wage war against the Old Ones, but unfortunately, this basically enslaved the entire race. By the time the leader of the Necron, the Silent King, and the rest of the Necron lords realized what had happened, they decided to turn against their Catan masters. They betrayed them and broke them into Catan shards, and those Catan shards were scattered throughout the galaxy. Once they were free from slavery, the Necrons continued their attack on the Old Ones, who at this point had to genetically engineer psychically powerful warrior races to fight the Necrons, who didn't possess any psychic powers. Unfortunately, all of these warrior races started to feed into the Immaterium and cause parasites known as enslavers to invade real space. The Old Ones had no option but to escape the Milky Way galaxy. Because of the enslaver plague, they left their warrior races behind, and the Necrons were left to basically conquer the galaxy, because the enslavers didn't really do anything to the Necrons. Now, the Necrons decided to take a different route. Instead of continuing to fight the warrior races, they decided to enter a deep sleep. Because they were immortal, they knew that they can just go into their tomb worlds and wait out the enslaver plague. The enslavers would kill out the warrior races, and then the enslavers, not having anything to consume anymore, would just leave or die out from real space. And then the Necrons will rise up, and they would take control of the galaxy as they wanted to. Fast forward to the 42nd millennium, and the Necrons are now awakening from their deep sleep. They're realizing that the old warrior races are still around, and the galaxy is just completely different than what it used to be. And they are waging war to reorganize themselves and conquer the galaxy once more. To the Necrons, all other races are just annoying children that need to get off their property or get disintegrated by their weaponry. Necrons can be divided into sub-factions called dynasties. Each dynasty comes with its own unique rules, usually led by a Necron lord, and it specializes in some type of way. Aesthetically, they are a cross between ancient Egypt and robots. They are unique because their technology is so advanced that it seems like it's magic, but it's grounded in science. They can basically bend the rules of physics or just outright break them. You would want to play this faction if you like the concept of a highly advanced alien civilization with the weapons to back up its arrogance, and also just the aesthetic of an ancient Egyptian robotic sci-fi theme. Next, we move on to the Eldari, or the Eldar. The Eldar's origin is tied to the war in heaven. They were one, if not the most successful, and well-made warrior race that the Old Ones created. They had direct communication with their creators, and evidence of this is found in the Eldar mythology, as each god and their stories are actually allegories to the war in heaven and the Old Ones. The Eldari's control of psychic powers rivaled that of their creators, and the Eldar were taught how to utilize and then improve the paths through the Imperium, calling them the Web Way. Using all of these gifts, they fought valiantly in the war in heaven until their creators left the galaxy and their enemies, the Necrons, went into hibernation. Alone and under attack by the enslavers, the courageous Eldar race prevailed and eventually were able to outlive the enslaver plague. It is not clear if they did this through conflict with the warp parasite or if they just hid in the webway. Either way, after the enslavers were gone, the Eldar civilization flourished. They waged war with other warrior races and always maintained a watchful eye for the Necrons' return, but the Eldari were successful enough to take control of the galaxy. At their peak, the Eldari had everything they could ever want. They had long outgrown the need for physical labor or manual agriculture. Society provided all that was required without any individual effort. Unfortunately, this utopia caused the Eldar to seek extreme desires in order to satisfy their highly psychic minds. The majority of the society plunged into hedonism, and pleasure cults became the social norm. Fueled by murder, sex, and drugs, the violent and unbridled hedonism echoed in the Imperium, as the emotions of this incredibly powerful Eldar race coalesced into an entity of pure pleasure. In a catastrophic etheric explosion, the Eldar race inadvertently created the chaos god Slaanesh. Slaanesh consumed the souls of the majority of the Eldar race and tore a hole between the boundaries of the Immaterium and reality, centered at the heart of the Eldar Empire. This would become known as the Eye of Terror. The psychic backlash of the birth of Slaanesh left the Eldar race in ruin. Homeless and scattered, the Eldar tried their best to cling on to what remained of their once great empire. Now that we have a brief history of the Eldar, we can talk about their three major factions. The first is the Craftworld Eldar. These Eldar survived the birth of Slaanesh because they were never part of the hedonistic culture at the core of their empire. They belonged to a commercial trading sect that looked down upon the debauchery at the heart of their society, and instead traveled the stars in massive, planetoid-sized spacecraft called Craftworlds. These were self-contained, starfaring communities, housing hundreds of Eldar families. Right before the fall, many Craftworld communities were called upon by the Eldar Seers to attempt to save as many Eldar families as they could, who weren't corrupted by the cult of pleasure. With psychic foresight of their empire's impending doom, the Eldar Seers and the Craftworlds managed to save some of the Eldar culture by loading it onto these massive ships before the Great Fall. Currently, these Craftworld Eldar are what remains of the same portion of the ancient Eldar Empire. They wage war not only to survive, but because they have pride for their ancient culture. In appearance, the Craftworld are very elf-like and tend to be slim and tall. There are actually an unknown number of Craftworlds in existence. However, the major Craftworlds have their own combat specialties, and it's represented in the Codex. People who would want to play Eldar need to be prepared for a very Tolkien sci-fi aesthetic, and also those people that want to explore the psychic elements on the tabletop. The second Eldar faction is known as the Drukhari, or the Dark Eldar. These are the Eldar that participated in the hedonistic debauchery that caused the downfall of their empire, but then refused to give up that lifestyle and just kept going. After the Empire collapsed, the few surviving pleasure cults that miraculously avoided Slaanesh gathered together in this massive webway port, just like their ancestors hid from the enslavers back in ancient times. Safely inside the webway, the Dark Eldar slowly built up a massive city known as Kamara. Unable to use their psychic powers because then they would alert Slaanesh and Slaanesh would consume their souls, they had to resort to feeding off the pain and misery of others. In appearance, the Dark Eldar are corrupted elf-like aliens. They desire only to torture and torment for all of eternity. You would want to play this race if you're a little sick in the head or if you like the pirate and elf theme. They're also very mobile. The army has some of the fastest vehicles. And then there's the third major Eldar faction known as the Harlequins. The Harlequins were the devout worshippers of the Eldar deity called Segra, the laughing god. He was part of the Eldar mythology, and my theory is that he is the psychic representation of one of the old ones of ancient times. The Harlequins basically travel around the stars, reminding their Eldar brethren, both Dark Eldar and Craftworld Eldar, of their ancient tales of their people. At their core is the belief that Segra will somehow help defeat Slaanesh and save the Eldar people. They resemble bardic elves or circus performers. This faction would be really fun to play if you like fast-moving infantry, but to be honest, I've never met a Harlequin player. I've never even met somebody that's purchased Harlequins. Maybe it's just because that's in our play group, but it's just a faction that doesn't get that much love from the actual players. And then we get into the minor factions of the Eldar. There are two playable factions and then one that isn't in the Codex. The first playable faction is the Inari, which are the worshippers of the recently created god of death Ennead. But because the lore and model line is so new, this is usually a mercenary force for one of the major Eldar factions. You also have the Eldar Corsairs, which are an offshoot of the Craftworld. Think of them as renegade Craftworld Eldar who became pirates but are too scared to take it up the butt like the Dark Eldar, so they just become pirates. And then there's the minor faction that doesn't have a rule set. It's worth mentioning though because they're kind of cool. They're known as the Exodites. They ride dragons. Well, they ride dinosaurs that they call dragons, and they're pretty cool. We have a standalone video for each one of these armies, so check it out at the end of the video if you want to. Now let's move on to my favorite Xeno race in all of 40k, the Orcs. The origins of the Orcs date back to the War in Heaven. Originally called the Krork by the Old Ones, they were another warrior race that was created to combat the Necrons. Unlike the Eldar, that probably survived the Enslaver Plague by hiding, the Orcs definitely survived through brutal conflict. This alien race was genetically engineered to be a savage-killing machine. The species is part fungus, part animal, and only thinks about one thing: fighting and winning. That's two things. Damn. When you think of a creature created for the sole purpose of being a warrior race, the Orcs fit the bill perfectly. They go from spore to full-grown murderer in just a couple of days. They don't have to be taught how to fight either, because they instinctively do it. Even major concepts of war, such as engineering, medicine, space travel, it's all biologically built into their genetics by the Old Ones. They don't have to learn it from anyone. They're extremely durable. Many Orcs can go hours without a head and then still get it stitched back together by one of their medics. Their instinct tells them how to organize themselves. In their mind, they always follow the orders of the biggest and toughest orc. When a huge gathering of these Xenos get together, they produce some type of collective psychic wave called Wa energy that allows them to become even deadlier. Think of them as like swarms of locusts. The Orcs represent the strongest of the Orcoid species, but there are also Squigs, Grots, and Gretchen. They assist the Orcs during battle, and they're just there so that the Orcs can kick around. They follow similar biological and psychic patterns as the Orcs, but they're just weaker. The Orcs actually rarely bother to form cohesive empires, and that's because once they're done killing their enemies, they turn around and fight each other. I have a full origin story on the Orcs. It's called the 40 Facts on the Krork, or 40 Facts on the Brain Boys. I'll link it down in the description below. I really recommend that you check it out because it goes in depth as to why they were created the way that they were by the Old Ones. There's actually a lot of reasons why you want to start an Orc army. This isn't just me being biased, but like the Orcs are really good at close combat in the lore, and it's the same in the tabletop. The tabletop, this current edition, they're also really good at range, so they're just an all-around good army. On top of that, They're really good for kit bashing. You can kit bash some amazing orc vehicles, and then finally, of course, it's just large mobs of infantry and wacky rules. Now let's move on to the Chaos Gods and the Demon race. The origins of the demons lies within the Immaterium, sometimes referred to as the Warp. The Immaterium is an otherworldly dimension that doesn't follow the rules of time and space, but it's still mysteriously connected to the real world. To understand the growth of the Warp, we must look at it through the timeline of real space, although in reality, everything in the Warp has always existed, so time and space doesn't and does exist. It's a really strange place. In the beginning, the Warp was very calm. It was a place of etheric power that was malleable enough to be shaped by the Old Ones. This is how they created the Webway. They were able to use the powers of the Immaterium to bend this timeless dimension to better serve them. When the Old Ones created the Psychic Warrior races, the Immaterium reacted to the increased raw emotions of these creatures. More specifically, it reacted to the negative emotions created by the war in heaven, and each emotion began to coalesce to form chaos entities. These entities were ageless, and they couldn't be understood by the basic intelligent beings born in reality. Enslavers, warp vampires, furies, all of these creatures assaulted reality. Some entities, however, became the raw essence of a particular emotion, and then they became the Chaos Gods. I hesitate to say that the Chaos Gods were created or that they were born, because strangely enough, the Chaos Gods have always existed in the Immaterium. This is another strange effect of the reality-bending powers of the Warp. There are 4 major Chaos Gods: Slaanesh, Khorne, Nergal, and Tzeentch. Each god was so powerful that it could break off a piece of itself and send it into real space. These were known as demons. Demons are basically smaller pieces of the grander essence of the emotion of the Chaos God. And the Chaos Gods themselves can't really be understood by a simple human mind. The true goal of the Chaos Gods is almost as mysterious as the Immaterium is. They fight amongst each other as much as they fight in real space. Each faction is one of the 4 major Chaos Gods, with a 5th faction that encompasses those that they corrupt. We can start off with Nergal. He is the raw emotion of entropy, and as such, he is empowered by anything that causes decay. Disease is the most common thing that's connected to Nergal, as it is the quickest way for something to rot, but Nergal is fed by simple passing of time. Aging, deterioration, anything like that feeds Nergal. Nergal's goal can be summed up as convincing or corrupting his followers to accept the process of falling apart. Once a creature in real space understands that deterioration is inevitable and chooses to spread that ideology, Nergal blesses him with his powers. His followers are always depicted as disease-ridden creatures that joyfully spread the pestilence, because in their minds, the Lord will always keep them in a perpetual state of decay. In a strange way, they always enjoy immortality as they very slowly fall apart or die. The reason you would want to play Nergal is because these demons and worshippers are very durable. They have high wounds and usually have really good saves. It is very hard to kill a Nergal army. And then there's the Chaos God Khorne. He is the raw emotion of rage. He feeds off of whatever anger causes, usually conflict, war, violence, and the spilling of blood. He also feeds off of martial prowess. Khorne's minions and followers are usually savage warriors and never make use of psychic powers. He wants to sow as much anger as he can, and using psychic or even range powers usually prevents his enemies from feeling vengeance in their heart, which is something that he wants. He feeds off of that. Khorne and his demons follow the traditional appearance of most malevolent demons. They are horned devils, massive brass-covered warriors, and giant winged monsters. You would want to play Khorne if you prefer melee combat as opposed to range or psychic powers, but also want that idea of being part of the Immaterium and like the chaos of the warp. The 3rd Chaos God is Tzeentch. Tzeentch is the raw emotion of change. He feeds off of the fluctuations of emotions that stem from plotting, hoping, and understanding. When a scholar grows in understanding on a certain subject matter, or a politician maneuvers through a risky dealing, Tzeentch is empowered. The most mysterious of the Chaos Gods, the followers and the demons of Tzeentch always gain new insight into the universe and the psychic powers of the Immaterium. Aesthetically, he represents wisdom, so things like birds, books, scrolls, feathered pens, things like that really represent Tzeentch. You would want to play Tzeentch if you are interested in all of the disciplines of psychic powers. He is basically the perfect Chaos God just to have a full army of Psykers. Finally, you have Slaanesh. Slaanesh is the raw emotion of pleasure. He feeds off of the desire and then the fulfillment of that desire. His demons and followers bathe in the ecstasy of release, no matter how it is achieved. The aesthetic of sexual desire is the most common amongst the followers of Slaanesh, but anything that brings enjoyment can be a way to honor Slaanesh. Out of the 4 Chaos Gods, Slaanesh is the last faction to get an update with new models and new lore. You also have the corrupted followers of the Chaos Gods. These are usually humans that have turned their backs on the Imperium and are now dedicated to either one or all of the Chaos Gods. You rarely have an alien species that is corrupted by chaos, not because it doesn't happen, but because Games Workshop, again, focuses on humanity. You can have Traitor Guardsmen, you can have Traitor Adeptus Mechanicus, known as the Dark Mechanicus, but the main focus and the most popular one are the Chaos Space Marines. The origin stories of the Chaos Space Marines dates back to the Great Crusade. We are picking up where we left off with the origin story of humanity. During this time, the Chaos Gods managed to corrupt the Emperor's favorite Primarch's son, Horus Lupercal. Horus was actually the War Master of all of humanity's military forces, a role given to him by his father, who was busy working on the Webway project. This was a project to create humanity's very own path through the Immaterium, just like the old ones and the Eldar did. Horus was convinced by the Chaos Gods to betray his father, which initiated a civil war to overthrow the Emperor and gain control of humanity. Horus rallied 9 of his brothers to fight against the Imperium in what became known as the Horus Heresy. Ultimately, the War Master was defeated by his father and his Primarch brethren who remained loyal. Unfortunately, the Emperor suffered terrible wounds when he fought Horus, and ultimately he had to be entombed into the Golden Throne, which became his life support system. The traitorous Space Marines that didn't die during the Battle of Terra actually escaped into the Eye of Terror, and since that time they've been coming out of the Eye of Terror or out of the Immaterium and still fighting the Imperium and just causing mayhem in the service of the Chaos Gods. In appearance, the Chaos Space Marines are just mutated Astartes, and those mutations change depending on what god they worship. They usually worship either one of the 4 Chaos Gods or all 4. We have a whole playlist on different war bands, so if you guys want to get an idea of the in-depth lore of any type of Chaos Space Marine, check out the playlist on the channel. Next, we have the alien species known as the Tyranids. The origins of the Tyranids is a complete mystery. No one knows where they came from or how many of them there are. They just know that they came from outside of the galaxy. The Tyranids are just a massive superorganism capable of traveling from planet to planet, consuming biological material on each world, and then just moving on to the next one. They're animalistic in nature. There is no reasoning with the Great Devourer. The Tyranid Hive Fleet usually spews out lesser bioforms to accomplish the task of complete consumption of a world, and then these lesser organisms are controlled by a hive mind. But the hive mind itself has never communicated with any intelligent life form in the galaxy. They are considered the apex predator of space. The Tyranids are capable of quickly adapting to whatever force is preventing them from absorbing all possible biomass. The best theory of why they're in the Milky Way galaxy is that they crossed the great void of space because they simply ate all of the biomass to the nearest galaxy. This is just the next one in a long line of multiple galaxies that the Tyranids have consumed. The other theory claims that the Emperor and his Astronomicon is inadvertently attracting the Tyranids. Regardless of the purpose or origin of the Tyranids, it seems that they are unstoppable and they will simply consume everything in the galaxy. The Tyranids are further divided into lesser factions called Hive Fleets. The Hive Fleets usually tend to have special adaptations based on the obstacles that they have encountered in the Milky Way galaxy, and these adaptations are represented in the Codex as special rules. The Tyranids resemble the traditional alien bioform of most science fiction. They look like Alien or the Zerg. The reason you would want to play Tyranids is if you like giant swarms of creatures. Everything about the Tyranids is biological, so they can still shoot at you, but even the actual ammo and the gun is a biological weapon. You also have giant, massive, scythe-wielding monsters, which is always fun. The Tyranids have a minor faction called Genestealer cults. Genestealers are powerful Tyranid bioforms that are sent out as scouts for the Hive Fleet. Once they arrive at a planet, they start to prep it for its eventual consumption. They do this by inseminating the planet's native population with their gene seed, thus creating a cult of hybrids that try to gain control of the world so that when the Hive Fleet arrives, it's easier for them to consume the planet. The whole process of building a cult is very complex, and it depends on the native population that's on the world. Most gene stealers can go from having a couple of members to interbreeding with an entire social class and conquering the world in a very short amount of time. In appearance, the gene stealers range from slightly mutated humans to grotesque mockeries of what a human is supposed to be. The thing about gene stealers, similar to the worshippers of chaos, you're always going to have a hybrid that is part Tyranid, part human. You're rarely going to have some type of alien with Tyranid. Because of this faction is similar to the Astra Militarum, where it favors tanks and light infantry, but it could always be coupled with a Tyranid army. Now we finally move on to everyone's favorite major 40k race, the Tau Empire. The Tau race was discovered by the Imperium in the 35th millennium, and at that time the species was very primitive. It was fragmented into warring tribes that barely had Stone Age technology. The Imperium decided to ignore the savage species and focus on more pressing matters in their empire. Unlike the other intelligent species in the Milky Way galaxy, the Tau were not created by the Old Ones. At least there's no evidence to support this. The Tau actually barely register in the warp. They have no psychic powers. The common belief is that they just evolved through normal evolutionary means, but my theory is that they were created by the Eldar, but that is a topic for a completely different video that I'll create later on. Now, the beginning of the Tau Empire can actually be traced back to an old legend. The Tau speak of a terrible conflict between the warrior tribes of the plains and the city of Fjordtown. It was during this conflict that two mysterious Tau convinced the warrior factions to stop their bickering and unite as one. These mysterious figures were the first Ethereals, and they spoke of the importance of peace and understanding between all Tau. They described a greater good that each Tau should strive for. Convinced by the Ethereals, the Tau united, and because of their cooperation between all the tribes on the planet of Tau, they were able to rapidly develop their civilization's technology. Ultimately, they attained faster than light travel, and then formed the Tau Empire. In appearance, the Tau are humanoid, but they're smaller than humans, and they have blue-gray skin, hoofed feet, and 4-digit hands. Their technology is for the most part based around science, and they heavily rely on artificial intelligence, both in their vehicles and in their drones. Although they believe in working with any race willing to cooperate, they will not hesitate to show military force. They are divided into minor factions according to their homeworlds. These homeworlds are called septs, with the exception of one minor faction led by a rebellious leader called Commander Farsight. You want to play this faction if you like a shooty army and you enjoy a slight anime/Gundam aesthetic. And those were 40 facts on the origins of the 6 major races in Warhammer 40k. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, thank our patrons on Patreon. I was going kind of quick towards the end of the video, and that's because I wanted to get this done by the weekend, by Saturday. The reason for that is because we are doing our subscriber appreciation giveaways. We are giving away a starter set of your choosing. In order to participate, all you have to do is be a subscriber, because this is a subscriber appreciation giveaway. Number 2, hit the like button on this video. And number 3, comment down in the comment section below. We're going to choose the winner from the comment section. Check the profile, make sure that they're subscribed and that they like this video, and we will announce it a week from now. You can be anywhere in the world. We'll just ship it out to you guys. The reason we are doing this is, number 1, because we appreciate you guys listening to our lore videos. And number 2, this is the perfect opportunity for you to start a new army. There's a lot of you guys that are new to 40k, specifically new to the tabletop, and you don't even have an army. You came in because you either like the lore or you play the video games. But I really want to help you guys out and start on the tabletop and start painting miniatures and building your own army. And the best way to do that is just to give you a cool starter set. It gives you, for the most part, everything that you need. just let us know which one you choose once we notify you. Again, this is going to go for a week. You can comment however many times you want, but be careful because YouTube will mark you as a spammer if you do it too many times. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. More detailed videos to come. I'm probably going to do an origin story on almost every faction where I really go in depth as to what they are and how they came to be. I only have the Krork, and the only one that I'm satisfied with, I should say, is the Sisters of Battle and the Krork. Those are the only two factions that I have an origin story for that I actually like. So expect better videos in the future. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow. This was Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.